First of all, I'll start with just what was your thoughts on the movie about your dad?
I've seen a lot of people depict my father. This was absolutely over the top. It was great. The job that was done by Dennis Quaid, by John Voight, by Penelope Ann Miller, by Mark, who produced it, and everybody was great. I met with them, gosh, 15 years ago, 12, 13, 14, 15 years ago. I tell them stories. Like at the library, they refer to me as the prequel uh, because they all have stories, but then I have the backstory to the story because I've been there around that long and had conversations with my father. So it was nice to see some of the stories that I was able to tell get into the movie and make points that they were trying to make, and to have that kind of knowledge. So I love the movie. I thought it was great. I thought the way that Penelope depicted Nancy was perfect. I think the woman who depicted my mother did a great job doing that because my mother didn't like politics at all. And so I get it and I understand it. But she voted for my dad twice. Everybody did a great job. And what was really wonderful is my kids, Cameron and Ashley, and Ashley's husband and Cameron's wife, were able to go. Ashley was born in '83, Cameron in 1978, and see their grandfather and now understand it through the Hollywood days and the growth and who he was and what have you. Even though they knew who he was, the movie really did it absolutely 100% on target.
Wow. So you had a hand in kind of helping them depict him?
Well, no, it's just like I have stories. Like I go to the library and I talk to the docents. I tell them stories. Uh, it's like in the movie you'll see a story that you have my dad basically there with Mikhail Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev is saying to my father, they're having a conversation. Mikhail Gorbachev says, my grandmother was a Christian, and she used to go to church every day and come over and see me and say, Mikhail, I prayed for the atheists today. I prayed for you. Well, that was a story that came from me from the time I met with Mikhail Gorbachev. We did 3 or 4 events together in the 1990s where we did just Q&A and questions back and forth. And that story came from one of the meetings we had, uh, Mikhail Gorbachev and I shared with them, but I shared it back in the 1990s with Mark. And it was an important part of the movie because my dad used to end every talk with Mikhail Gorbachev, if it's God's will. And so that kind of a conversation. So there's stories that my dad shared with me or Mikhail Gorbachev shared with me that I was able to share with them back in the 1990s. And they had it on tape and they put it in the movie because it made the right point of what they were trying to do.
Wow. I had no idea. I'm so young, I'm watching this and my grandfather was alive,
It's
whenever.
a but it's a history lesson.
Yeah.
It really is a history lesson about where we were and how one person can make a difference. Whether it's in Hollywood with the Screen Actors Guild and the strikes that were going on, or as president of the United States and finally bringing communism to its knees and winning the Cold War without firing a shot. It shows what one man can do, and that's important.
Well, what do you think about how this film about your dad, given what is going on in our country right now, how it could impact people throughout our country?
Well, I think it's important for people to see it so they understand history because 40 years later, we're now in much of the same position with the former Soviet Union. And it's interesting because in the beginning of the movie, John Voight plays like almost the narrator, old KGB guy, and a young guy knocks on the door, a young KGB guy. But the young guy, you got to understand who he is. They don't tell you who it is. Well, it's Vladimir Putin, who walks in and says to this old KGB guy, "What the heck did you do to my country? How did you lose it?" And the old KGB guy starts to tell the story. Let me tell you about the Crusader. And Reagan was the Crusader. And so we're at that point now where we need a crusader. We need someone to step up because, like my father said, there's what, 3, 4 wars started during his lifetime, none of which were started because America was too strong. And when we're weak, the world goes crazy, whether it's China, whether it's former Soviet Union, not Mikhail Gorbachev, but Putin. The world looks to the United States for leadership. And we had leadership, but we also had Maggie Thatcher, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, Helmut Kohl, Pope John Paul II, and what have you. And it's interesting because this weekend, they opened up the Pope and the President exhibit at my father's library in Simi Valley. And that was an important relationship between the two of them. And it doesn't show that much in the movie, but in fact, it was a great relationship for them to have.
That's actually what I was going to ask you next is what you thought. What are your thoughts on your father's relationship with Pope John Paul II, especially since we're a Catholic outlet? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's magic. It's my dad's brother was Catholic, his father was Catholic, his mother was Presbyterian, my dad was Presbyterian. My mother, Jane Wyman, and myself and my sister Maureen were baptized on December 8th, 1954. So we're all Catholic. I don't know if you know this, but my mother, Jane Wyman, was buried as a Dominican to the Third Order.
No, I didn't know that.
A lot of people don't know that. She's a Dominican to the Third Order. I always tell people, if you like politicians and you like my father, you know he's in heaven. When you get there and you see my dad, look 3 floors above him. Because I'm thinking a Dominican to the Third Order, my mother might be a little bit ahead of a politician that you love. No, my mother was absolutely terrific, and what have you. So, there was a lot of Catholics around my dad. Bill Clark, who probably you Google Judge Bill Clark. He's the one that opened up the relationship between my dad and Pope John Paul, and that was a tremendous relationship between the two of them, started by Bill Clark, who was honored by Catholicism on many occasions for where he was and who he was. And I like to tell the story about, my dad was shot, Pope John Paul was shot, but what did the two of them do? The two of them forgave the men who tried to murder them. They honored the Lord's Prayer. How many people you go into a room, and I talk about this when I go out and speak, and you say, well, how many people know the Lord's Prayer? And everybody, oh, yeah, I know the Lord's Prayer. They all raise their hands. They go, how many of you live it? Because I knew 2 people who lived it, Pope John Paul and Ronald Reagan. And I feel that because they honored God through the Lord's Prayer, where they forgave, God worked with them and ended up bringing peace to Poland, wrapping it around, and bringing down the Berlin Wall and peace to that area of the world. And unfortunately, today we don't have those people around.
I was actually thinking that while I was watching the movie, I was like, there's a lot of parallels as to what's going on now. If you compare now to then, there's just it's fascinating to see.
There are a lot of parallels. I just hope the mainstream media doesn't try and make it a political thing. It's not a political movie. It's a biopic about my father, and a factual biopic about my father. But people need to stay through the credits so they hear the letter at the end of the movie read by the child about the fish. So it's really important to do that.
So, are you Catholic then?
Yeah, I'm Catholic. Yeah.
What?
December 8th, 1954. My sister Maureen and my mother and I. Yeah. Oh yeah. I went to St. John's Military Academy. I went to Loyola High School. What can I tell you?
Wow.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
I didn't know.
I'm like everybody else. Though, left for a while, came back. It happens. My whole family is my wife Colleen. Converted to Catholicism a few years ago. My son Cameron, his wife Susanna, my daughter Ashley. So we got the whole everybody on the planet. The grandchildren been baptized within the church. Oh yeah,
Do you think your dad would have ever become Catholic?
Oh no,
No.
he wouldn't. He would. But the thing is, he wouldn't have become Catholic. But my gosh, he had his brother was Catholic, his father was Catholic, so he had a lot of Catholics around him. But he was really attached to his mom, as you saw in the movie, really attached to Nell, and what have you. So, and my dad was a Sunday school teacher. Nell was a Sunday school teacher. and what have you. So no, I don't think he would have become Catholic, but he didn't have to. There was enough in the family to cover it.
That is awesome. Well,
I'll tell
I
you. I'll tell you a quick story though,
oh,
because
okay.
I lived with my dad for a while when I was in high school, Loyola, because it was easier, closer to school, and what have you. And my dad used to get up every Sunday morning and take Nancy and the kids to Bel Air Baptist Church, Bel Air Press Church in Bel Air. And I asked my dad one time, I said, you get up every Sunday and you take everybody gets dressed and they go to Bel Air Presbyterian Church. You never asked me to go with you. And I'm here on Sunday. And he says, Michael, I didn't want to make your mother mad. I said, that makes sense. And mom, they depicted my mother perfectly in the movie. I told Penelope at the end because she was asking about because she played Nancy, but she was asking how they depicted my mother. Was that okay? I said, let me tell you a story about my mom. I said, 1980s, Dad gives one of his great speeches. And you might remember my mom had the number one television show back in the 1980s called Falcon Crest while my dad was in Washington. So it's like crazy in my family. And I called my mom. I said, you hear Dad's speech? He gave a great speech last night. Did you hear it? She says, Michael, I didn't like those speeches in the 1940s. What makes you think I'd like them today? She just didn't like politics, but she voted for him twice.
Wow,
Yeah,
that is such a
yeah.
cool story. I bet you have a lot
People,
of stories like
oh yeah.
that.
Well, that's why some of them made it, into the movie because I have those. Like they call me the prequel. So it's great to see that and see that the movie is just so authentic and a true biopic. Uh, and it shows the warts, what tough times he had, losing my sister Christine, getting divorced from my mother, tough things for him to go through. What was going on in Hollywood with the actor strike, those kinds of things. Not having a job, having to go to Vegas and try to do stand-up MC, which depicts in the movie with Nancy. Those tough times, very tough times, and he's able to really come through it. And again, my dad made lemonade out of lemons. I think that's depicted in the movie too. If you really look at it, all the roadblocks he had, whether it's at Reykjavik, whether it's giving the evil empire speech, whatever it might be. And it wasn't just the Soviets against him; he had his own people against him doing things, and he had to step above them and say, "No, I'm the president of the United States. This is the decision I'm making." And thank God he did.
Well, what I thought was really amazing was it was inspiring because it was like he had to go through all these terrible things, like you said, but also like he was like an underdog and
Mhm.
he had to hurdle over those things and ultimately succeeded.
Absolutely right. A life lesson. I mean, people go see this. It's a life lesson that this is a guy who grew up very poor. Like he used to tell me, our family didn't know we were poor till the government told us we were poor. Those kinds of things, and come out of that, out of Illinois, come to the United States, or come to the United States, California, and have a career. But again, it's a great life lesson to see. Don't let those roadblocks, those bumps in the road, stop you, and use them as the excuse to fail. Use them as an excuse to move forward in your life. And so, like after he's governor, what do I do now? Hey, presidency in 1976, he loses the nomination, but he didn't stop. He ran again in 1980 and 1984 when he was down in the polls. You know, his first debate with Mondale was a disaster. They didn't pull him off the stage and say we're going to put somebody else in there. Said let Reagan be Reagan. And the next debate, he crushes Mondale and wins 49 states.
Amazing. Just
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
I don't think I was even born yet.
Well, my our daughter Ashley was born in '83, so I get it. I understand it, but she's a trooper with her grandpa and Cameron and Ashley. Yeah, wonderful.
Well, were you happy with the way they portrayed his faith too?
Yeah, I think yes, because it was important as a child. I mean, that's a true story. The book is actually a true story. The book is at the Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara, uh, and it was at the Reagan Ranch where that book was. Where they and so again, it's important how he became a Christian at a very young age by reading the book, and and really the rest is it. And faith was important to my father, very important. When he in 1987 on gosh, I think it was Good Friday. I was flying with my dad in Air Force One, and as we were landing at Point Magoo for Easter weekend, he counted out number 9 on his finger. I said, "What's important about that?" He said, "9 more months, I'll no longer be president of the United States." I said, "Is that important to you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Why?" He said, "Michael, ever since I was shot back in 1981, and I remember looking out the rear window of my limo and seeing people laying in their own blood with bullets meant for me, I haven't gone to church. I haven't wanted to put people in harm's way. I had a fear. Maybe every once in a while I would go, but I just didn't go. And I'm looking forward to no longer be president of the United States so I can once again go visit with my Lord and Savior on any given Sunday morning." And after he left office, he never missed church any Sunday from that point on. And when he had Alzheimer's and couldn't go, pastor would go to the house and minister to my dad. And every time that happened, the minister would say, "I went to minister to the president and he ministered to me."
Wow.
That's a story didn't make it into the movie. It's a 2.5 hour movie. You could do, I could tell you a story, keep it going for 6.
I bet you could.
Yeah.
Wow, well, thanks so much for sharing that. I think that's so amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.